Illinois finally has a kind of sort of stopgap bridge budget. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. A lot of life affecting this week with the legislature finally getting something done, and we'll talk about that. Here to join me in that endeavor, Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus, University of Illinois, Springfield, Political Science. Kent, welcome back.
Good to be here.
And Jordan Abudayyeh is here. She's the State House reporter for WICS News Channel 20 in Springfield. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you for having me.
You've had a busy week, too.
It has been very busy.
Those live shots, I'm telling you. How do you do that all the time? Okay. Stopgap budget, finally an agreement. The governor and the Speaker of the House still don't seem to like each other's priorities very much, but they got something done. Kent, kind of where are we?
Well, we have a spending authorization. We don't really have a budget. We went a whole year without a budget. We're starting a new fiscal year without a budget. But we have spending authority. The biggest deal is that we funded elementary, secondary education for an entire year. So there is certainty there, assuming the state has enough cash flow to actually make the payments. Right. But people in the local schools, they're going to be able to plan. We know that schools are going to open, and that's the biggest deal, and that's also the biggest leverage point. If we weren't opening schools, there would be a lot more screaming and hollering than what we got. And then the rest of it involves doing some things for social services, doing some things for higher education, right. And probably from the governor's standpoint, the most important part of it is money for operations so that you can pay the bills, keep the water and the lights on at the prisons. And we did things, there was more money for schools, and some of that went to Chicago, and part of it in terms of their pensions. So, that was a pressure point. And so, we relieved the pressure, but we're going to continue to spend more money than we have coming in. We're going to have a fight in November in the elections, and then we'll see as we face the next fiscal cliff crisis deadline in January where we're at.
Yeah, Jordan, I know you probably got plenty of reaction in addition to covering the main event. Any legislators happy about this? The governor happy about this? Where are we?
I don't think they're necessarily happy, because I don't think you can really pat yourself on the back for not doing your full job. But I think both sides wanted something done before an election. I don't think Democrats or Republicans wanted to go into an election with no state budget, schools not being able to open, and those sorts of things still looming above them. So I think a lot of lawmakers think this buys them some time. I think the Republicans are going to blame the Democrats and say, well, they didn't want to compromise, and we heard this from the governor. This was our only option. This was our only option to avoid crisis. And so I think everyone's just kind of blasé about it. We got something done, but no one's celebrating.
Right. Well, I guess the big thing is if you open up Leslie Munger, the state comptroller, has a website, and you every day, if you go to the website, you can see how much the state is behind in paying its bills. And I think we're still in the neighborhood of $7 to $8 billion. And as Kent said, we haven't changed the tax structure. There's no new money coming in, so they're using pots of money that they have here and there. They're appropriating, but they're not getting more in. Now, Mike Madigan still said on the floor of the House, after the House overwhelmingly with bipartisan vote, I think it was like 104 to 5 or something, this agreement to keep things going, he said, this is another case where the governor took his turnaround agenda off the table, his middle class weakening turnaround agenda. We can get something done in those situations. Then the governor had his press conference after both House and Senate had passed the bill in a bipartisan way, had many Republican legislators with him, including the leaders of the House and Senate Republicans, and said, this is only the beginning. We can't be too proud. We're keeping things going, but still, no tax increase without reform, which is what he's been saying for 18 months, which is what the Democrats say is holding it up and what the governor says the state must do, to get an improved business climate and ultimately raise everyone up. Isn't that where we've been, Ken?
Oh, certainly. I mean, we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And, if you want to go back a little further in history, the governor criticized the Democrats and then Governor Quinn, saying you're kicking the can down the road, you're not solving the state's problems, you're running up huge debt, and we need something different. And so we've spent now 18 months basically running up huge debt and not changing any of the dynamics, and it's not clear what it's going to take to change that. The dual problems are still there. The governor has a very specific agenda that runs counter to the core of a lot of Democratic constituencies, and if you get past that, we've got state spending that is $4 billion, pick a number, more than state revenue in terms of what people kind of think are the basic things the state needs to do.
And that's even in addition to the unpaid bills that
and
are
then
still
$8
sitting
billion
there.
on top of that.
Right.
So those problems, the governor said this is a bridge to reform.
Right.
Could be. Could also be that famous bridge to nowhere. And
Well, we'll
so
find-
we really don't know.
We will find out. Yeah, Jordan, just where is this?
I think it's interesting that Republicans came out yesterday in their press conference and said, oh, this budget is balanced, this spends only what we have. And sure, the appropriations might be spending what we have, but the budget also relies on the court orders and consent decrees that have been keeping much of the government operating throughout this year-long impasse. They continue going, and a lot of them are spending at levels of revenue that we no longer have because it's FY15 money. And so I think, is this kicking the can down the road? Absolutely. And getting a politician to say that, they're not going to admit that. But I think everyone's waiting for November. I think Governor Rauner and Democrats think it could be a transitional time. I think Governor Rauner's hoping he picks up some seats. If he picks up some seats, then he can have more leverage to get his agenda passed. But I think if November comes and nothing changes, the dynamic at the State House doesn't change, I think we face another cliff. And at that point, who backs down? Does Governor Rauner, after almost 2 years, back down off his turnaround agenda? Because he showed Speaker Madigan time and time again. The Speaker mentioned they've done this 7 times. They've passed 7 different appropriation bills when the governor takes his agenda off the table. So when the state is facing another fiscal cliff at the end of this year, is Governor Rauner going to take his turnaround agenda off the table again? He says no, but what does he have left at that point if he doesn't win anything in an election and nothing has changed?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see. Just another kind of related question. The governor had spent a few weeks going around the state, going particularly to downstate areas, saying, we're not going to give any money to Chicago to bail them out. And yet, Chicago public schools did get enough money to move forward. And as Kent mentioned, they're going to get some help with pension, although it's dependent on the state legislature passing pension reform later on, which is part of the turnaround agenda, truly. So, I heard, I think it was Brandon Phelps, a legislator from Southern Illinois, one of the ones that, I think the Republicans hope to gain a seat, said, I think the governor caved because he's giving money to Chicago. And then the governor, and I know Leader Radogno of the Senate, Christine Radogno, Republican leader, said, we're not giving Chicago anything because they're paying for it themselves. So I guess you can look at things in different ways.
Sure. And, it certainly was the case that Chicago's problems did play into this, that the speaker may have been moved a little more than he wanted to because of the mayor coming and clearly wanting help.
That would be the Mayor Emanuel of Chicago.
Yeah, there is an authorization to raise taxes, property taxes, which could not have been done without the legislature passing and the governor signing a bill. There's money for pensions. We have money in kind of a 1-year poverty grant sort of thing, which also says we still haven't dealt with the school formula. So, in terms of all of one other thing that was, that's everybody says we need to do, we haven't done. We haven't fixed the way that we distribute money. But the crisis from Chicago probably doesn't gin up again until 12 months from now when we've got other payments due. And so, whether that changes the dynamic in January, who knows?
Yeah, I think the governor signed all but one bill that came to him just immediately the first day. And I think, wasn't it the pension bill that he's waiting to make sure the legislature does what they said they would do?
I think that's the agreement,
Yeah, so we'll see where that goes. One of the other things, just because we say this show is about what people, how it affects their lives. A lot of road work going on right now. The governor had a press conference a couple weeks ago, or maybe just a week ago, whatever, with everything comes together. With Randy Blankenhorn, our Secretary of Transportation, saying, if we don't get a budget by June 30th, by July 1st, the new fiscal year, 800 road projects will shut down. We'll just have to spend millions of dollars closing them and, leave everything in the lurch. All of those projects can now go forward too. So that's another benefit of where we're at, I guess. But and some social service agencies, I know there was talk in the discussions in the legislature as this was passing, not everybody is getting what they want. Let's talk about universities, for example. About $1 billion is now going to go to universities, but they're still getting less than a normal budget year.
Yes, and you've got 6 months worth of appropriations there, and the MAP grants, the scholarship assistance is there. But, and that means we're not going to close the doors at Chicago State, before the semester is even opens. On the other hand, if you were Illinois State, some that's a little more stable, you still have a 6-month budget. And so what kind of commitments are you making to people in terms of key staff, faculty, starting new projects? What assurances can you give people you're trying to get to come to Illinois or stay in Illinois that we've really have a stable situation to deal with? And the same thing for students. I mean, the problems are still there, and that that makes Illinois look less attractive to students in terms of where you go to school. So, if it's just about keeping the doors open, then yes, we did that. If it's about getting back to where we were in terms of stability and excellence in terms of higher education, we're a long way from there.
Yeah, and one of the press conferences among the many that we've seen, demonstrations, press conferences, vigils about a budget, was several presidents of universities from across the state came to the Capitol a couple days before the budget passed and said, we really need to get something going. Students are not signing up to come to our campuses. We just have to be careful about that. So again, we are in that process. The day after the legislature, or the day of the legislature's passage of this, one of the hostages of the budget situation, if some people would call it that, the State Museum in Springfield, was closed, I guess it's about 9 months ago, by the governor saying we need to save money, but then under court order, the union employees there all stayed, so the doors were closed to the public. The non-union people, including the director and the top people, were laid off or left or retired or got other jobs. And so the Museum Society, which is the fundraising group for it, had an opening on Thursday evening to mark the fact that Saturday, this weekend, it is finally reopening with a new $5 charge for adults to get in, and there's some special things for kids and seniors and stuff. And the governor showed up to help praise this, along with the director of Department of Natural Resources. Just kind of an odd situation, Jordan.
So bizarre. Throughout this entire impasse, the State Museum has been one of the most bizarre parts of it, because closing the museum and its other satellite campuses around the state really didn't save that much money in terms of the budget. And then you're still paying people. Doors were closed, and
they were apparently doing the research or whatever needed to be done, but they
lost people because you're a museum. And we talked to them before the museum closed, and they said we want to be able to show our research to people. I mean, that's the point of us being a museum. And so I think you really wasted almost a year, maybe destabilizing the museum in some aspect, for a $5 entrance fee that probably could have been implemented had the museum been open.
Right.
Like, you didn't have to close it. And I don't know. I don't know. Still, almost a year later,
I get the
point
feeling
was.
that the governor, particularly early in his term, he has said crisis creates opportunity. I think he likes pressure points to try to move an agenda, and I think he thought maybe kind of the populace in central Illinois would get behind his turnaround agenda or something, because they see that things like the museum can't just be sustained. I don't know.
Well, and we've reached to the point where we're now celebrating undoing collateral damage that had absolutely nothing to do with the the political fight or the policy. And unfortunately, as we dig our way out of this, which eventually we will, I assume, we're going to see a lot more of this. So we're going to celebrate the reopening of a social service agency that shuttered their door. It's kind of like, what was that all about? And,
we'll see.
And so it's not a good place to be.
Okay, as usual, when the governor is at something, I think people are always careful not to offend, because you respect the office and you also respect the purse strings that are held by the office. But it was interesting, there was an older gentleman named Lauren Nevling there. I believe he's from Monticello. He's chairman of the museum's board. He said the following, among the people giving the speeches, and there were a couple state representatives there, Laura Wojcicki-Jimenez and her kids, and Tim Butler, who are both from Springfield, both appointed during this recent Rauner administration. But Mr. Nevling said, in 2 days, the museum reopens to the public to end the most destructive non-natural disaster in the history of American museums. So it was just, he apparently isn't worried about saying something that might cast a negative light on the governor at that thing. It was kind of interesting. Let's talk about, it was said on the floor of the House during the budget debate by Barbara Flynn Curry, the top deputy to House Speaker Michael Madigan. And she's kind of the budget guru in many ways, truly, very, very smart person. But she said, even as we're debating this today, robocalls have started. Robocalls, of course, to the people who watch the show, they know that. It's political calls that come to your house and somebody says, your state representative is not standing with your people, is standing with Mike Madigan. So it turns out Rich Miller in Capitol Facts has reported that it was the Illinois Policy Institute, which is independent but closely aligned with Governor Rauner, who was putting some of these calls into some districts, talking, I guess, about a Chicago bailout. So let's look forward to this fall with where we are with Donald Trump, with our governor and our U.S. Senator Mark Kirk not even saying they're for Donald Trump, well, or certainly not going to the convention. Kirk says he's not for him. Where does that all go with this? Do we know yet, or will we have to see?
I think Democrats are hoping that Trump on the ticket means good things for them. And I think Republicans are hoping that they can spin this year-long impasse and refusal to pass reforms and blame everything on the Democrats. I think you heard Governor Rauner yesterday said, well, the politics are different than what we do in this building, and they're separate. But I think now
and he's the guy who keeps giving millions of dollars to the
all
Republican
of these
Party and Dan Proft's group that will be spending money to defeat Democrats.
I think it's going to be a very, very ugly election cycle. And so I think, pension reform and another budget by January, I mean, are you going to be able to go through 5 months of a terribly ugly election cycle, then come back in November with each other, sit at the table and bargain those things? That's going to be an interesting dynamic, I think.
Yeah. Any particular advantage? I mean, Illinois is it's been trending Democratic in presidential years, correct?
Yeah, I think Nate Silver, who's one of the gurus of predicting, said Illinois is like 97% sure to vote for Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's a very blue state.
If she doesn't get, do I say the indicted word? Yeah. Anyway, things are going on. You never know, but she's fine.
You never know.
Right.
So Illinois is, does trend Democratic in presidential elections. You got surge in turnout in presidential elections. Those things are going to help the Democrats. But clearly one of the major cross currents is how much money the Republicans are going to have. And normally they have been outspent by the Democrats. And now you're going to have huge amounts of money. And I think directly to Jordan's point, a lot of this is in independent expenditure groups. So he wrote that the governor gave $2.5 million to Liberty Principles, which is Dan Proft's PAC, who ran the campaign against Sam McCann. Right.
They didn't win that one, but Dan Proft will point out that, well, we were in a lot of other primaries and we won those because I've been in.
And so Richard Uihlein, who's another big funder for sponsor of the governor.
Uline product. You see the trucks all over the highway.
He gave $1.5 million to Liberty Principle. And so we've got an independent expenditure group that's sitting on $4 million. That's a lot of money, 3-4 months before the election. And the thing about independent expenditure commercials, again to Jordan's point, if you have to own the commercial, if your name's on it and people associate it with you, there are some limits to what you're going to say. If you've got a commercial that you're not going to say my opponent's an axe murderer, but if you have a independent expenditure group and it's not not clear where the money's coming from.
Right.
you
And they're
know,
not even allowed to coordinate officially with the
look,
candidate.
Yeah, then those campaigns tend to be much more negative. And so anybody that was sitting in central Illinois during the primary saw the kind of campaign that you're likely to see over and over again in the campaign that was run
Sam
against Senator McCann.
I would say double barrel is an easy
Yeah.
way to say what was aimed at him. We'll see where it goes. It's very, very hard to say. I'm going to switch gears just a little. Oh, one more thing on the federal thing. There was a rumor, a story came out, I think it was Bloomberg News somewhere, that Mike Ditka, the former Bears coach, might go and be one of the celebrity sports speakers at the Republican National Convention. So there was like a rumor leaked, maybe from the Trump campaign. And then you see the Chicago papers reached out to Mike Ditka, including like Michael Sneed, the columnist at the Sun-Times. And he said, no, the Republicans are crazy. He used worse words than that for not supporting Trump, and I like him, but I don't do conventions like that. I'm probably not going. So it was an interesting look at what might happen at that convention, where you don't have people like Mark Kirk or Bruce Rauner going, but maybe they'll try to fill the gap. I think Mr. Trump was very successful in Indiana, having Bobby Knight, the basketball coach of fame there, be on his side and say good things about him. So it'll be an interesting couple of conventions.
Was the empty chair at one of the conventions?
Yes.
That was at the Republican where
Romney convention. Yeah.
So
the
maybe
Romney
we'll
convention
see more
where,
things like that.
who's the actor who did
Clint
that?
Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood
Yeah.
spoke to the empty chair, and apparently that was an unscripted moment that some people liked and some people cringed at. But somehow it didn't exactly work out for Mr. Romney, but
Yeah,
it was a tough campaign, in the re-election against Obama.
Yeah, it's as with the rest of this campaign, we're going to see the Democratic convention is going to feature former presidents and all of the bigwigs and office holders, and it's going to look like the kind of political convention you're used to. And then, who knows at this point, the combination of the very unorthodox style of campaigning that you have with Donald Trump, combined with the fact that a lot of the Republican establishment really doesn't want to be associated with Trump. I think the Republican convention is going to be very, very different from what we normally associate with national conventions.
Yeah, go ahead,
He's built his brand against the establishment. So really, at this point, his supporters are so against the political elite. I don't think he could have previous presidents or high-ranking party officials sitting there and talking about him and praising him, because that's not what his supporters like.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch, even from afar. We'll see. I should get to one more state issue. The governor, I guess it might be viewed as quietly, but he signed a bill to extend the medical marijuana experiment in Illinois another 2.5 years, and I believe that included expanding the categories of illnesses that medical marijuana can be used for. And I know that a judge in Cook County, I believe, had just earlier in the week said PTSD, what soldiers are suffering when they come back, that would be another condition that must be served, that you should be able to get medical marijuana for. So that's kind of a difference, but it keeps all of these businesses that are opening in Springfield and other places operating for a while.
Was that news buried yesterday under all of the budget things?
Well, I think it was signed late in the day.
Yeah, I think it was. But, Governor Rauner has kind of shied away from a lot of the social issues. He really wants to focus on economics and making the state a better place fiscally. So that's not surprising to me, but I think if you're so into making the business climate better, you almost have to extend this program, because so much money has been poured into these businesses, and it kind of got a late start, and so it was getting ready to almost end. And what are you going to do? Shut all these businesses down that had invested money in Illinois? From a business perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
We'll see where it goes. Just another local note for Central Illinois. There was an interesting change in the 96th House District, which extends from Decatur into Springfield. Cindy Dedrick Wolfer was the Republican candidate against State Representative Sue Scher, who's a Democrat. It's considered quite a Democratic district, but Cindy Dedrick Wolfer announced that she was dropping out of the campaign, or suspending her campaign. If she formally drops out, which I'm not sure at this point as we tape this show that she's done, the Republicans would still have a chance to put somebody on the ballot, but it's a very difficult district to win for Republicans. I guess, what does that show? Is this a resources question, do you think? I mean, she did not say anything more than what a statement said that I've heard, just that, I thank everybody who helped me, but the resources, there's just so much involved, and thank you, but I'm not going forward. But it's, hundreds of thousands have been spent in that district just to keep Sioux share there in the past.
Right, and so I think this is probably, there's a clear signal there that even though the Republicans want to expand the map, as they say, get involved with more districts, that given the track record of two very expensive campaigns that have elected and re-elected Sioux share, that this is not a good choice of resources, and if the governor is not interested, then the House Republicans are not going to be fund Republican campaigns other than the governor and his close friends are not going to be interested, and so it's not attractive, and it's part of the fact that these maps are drawn to create very safe districts, and this has turned out to be a safe district.
Interesting. And Rodney Davis has another former competitor against him, U.S. Representative from Taylorville in the 13th Congressional District, Dr. David Gill, who ran as a Democrat in 2012 and lost to Rodney Davis in a close race that year because the district is kind of half and half. He ended up filing as an independent. There's already a Democrat in the race, Mark Wickland of Decatur. Jordan, is Rodney Davis going to be in trouble here? Of course, we don't know if Dr. Gill's petitions also have been challenged, so we'll see what happens with that.
I don't know how much of a challenge that's going to be to Rodney, especially because now if you have an independent and a Democrat, you're kind of splitting the vote on that side probably a little bit. And so I think this is probably good news for Congressman Davis. Yeah,
well, we'll see where that one goes. I could also mention that it looks like a petition drive to get a new kind of map drawing on the ballot, an independent commission. It's been challenged in court by a lawyer who happens to also be a lawyer to the state Democrats. And a court hearing is coming up within the next week, so we'll see if that stays on the ballot in November or goes. With that, it's time for us to go. Kent Redfield, Jordan Abudayyeh, thanks for joining me as usual. Great job. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.